people of color, especially African Americans, were more heavily exposed to industrial waste, the toxic wastes. So started to talk about that. And a lot of things started to come up. So kind of writing on the civil rights movement, and then the movement among different communities and a lot of sectors in the United States kind of came together thinking about the environment is not just this issue of great faraway places, and it's all the issues about pollution, but it's also got a very strong pattern of social inequality that needs to be addressed also. And you got something to gel together this environmental justice movement. Coming together of a lot of streams, civil rights movement, and I'll talk about each one of these. Civil rights, anti-toxics, academics, Native Americans, labor, and traditional environmentalists. So one was the civil rights movement. A real kickoff was a place called Warren County in North Carolina. And I have a little bit more on that in this section. There were PCBs, chemicals, I think, in the electrical fixtures. Is that what it is? The electrical company just throwing them at the roadside. It's a problem in North Carolina, so the state decided to do something about it. They gathered them up, and they had to do something, so they picked a dump site. They picked a dump site in a black, rural, poor neighborhood. And they said, what are you doing? This is like too terrible to just be scattered all over the site. Why are you putting this in our community? Right? And they put up a big fight about it. And that raised national attention. It's kind of like a spark plug for recognizing the racial inequality. And this is a group, the people in that town have been fighting civil rights struggles for a long time, about voting rights, about education, all of that. And they recognized the pattern. A study came out of that. And I'll get to both of those in a second. And one thing that the civil rights movement's entry into environmental issues, or the incorporation of environmental issues, was it raised the fact that there's a social structure of racial oppression. That's part of the picture. It's not just happening by accident. They bring that into the discourse. So the people in Warren complain about it. They say, why are you targeting our community? This is racially discriminatory. And then some other black communities said the same thing. Every case was like, no, it doesn't have anything to do with race. It's just a coincidence. Why are you so sensitive? You know, you're always so paranoid about this race thing. Prove it. So, the Civil Rights Group commissioned a study that proved it. They did studies, and they basically combined census tracts and the demographics and toxic, uncontrolled waste sites, and looked at the location. And they said, we thought, well, there's probably a couple of things. Probably it could possibly be poverty. You could just do it in poor neighborhoods, land is cheap. It could be your amount of homeowners, we think they have cloud, or it could be race. And so what's the impact of each one of those? Three different hypotheses. And they found out that race is the most potent variable. That had the strongest correlation with the presence of hazardous waste facilities throughout the United States. More than income, more than homes, all of that stuff. Here's some grounds. This is from the first study. And the darkest areas have a large black Hispanic percentage, and where there's 5 or more controlled toxic waste sites. So it just really popped up when they did that mapping. And they did this before there was easy computer mapping. I did this by hand. Here's LA. And this one is a Hispanic population. So it looks like most of the city, most but not all of the city of LA. So the darker dots are 50% greater Hispanic, and the number of hazardous waste sites is like 11. You know, there's a lot of places with a low Latino population, low waste sites. So the pattern shows up. They did a lot of cities, but I thought this is the one they were most familiar with. So it's not just in the old Confederacy, it's right here at home. So that was the first cut. So what happens is that got a lot of attention. So there's some policies put in place, there was debate. So what's happened since then? There should be policies to clean it up. We also have better mapping. You know, a census tract can be all kinds of things. We can do computer mapping, using geographic information systems to, say, pick a site and pick an area around it of a certain size, and do ways to make more precise relationships between hazards and populations. So you do a new study. So you looked at better mapping and what's happening with policy 20 years later. They found that it was worse than before. More precise mapping and 20 years of policy and talk still found that the populations were worse. The population, the racial disparities and hazardous race was worse than before, especially for Blacks and Latinos, and then elevated, it's kind of halfway for Asian American, Hispanic populations, kind of halfway between Blacks and white populations. So that problem is still with us. Just stop me any time. Okay. So anti-toxics movement. This comes out, the kickoff was Love Canal, Niagara Falls. It's a suburban development near Niagara Falls, mostly a working class white neighborhood. And what happened was it was a toxic waste site. And the developers just plowed over it and put in dirt and flattened it and built some houses and sold it to people. And what happened was, it's very interesting, kind of this happened over and over, that the women in the neighborhood were the ones that started to notice it. You know, it's the moms talking to each other, monitoring children's health. They know about family members, they see each other. And they say, someone got cancer, my kids got this. And they said, there's a lot of illness around here. And the family members, children, more than you would expect. And they started to investigate it. And the first thing was that they got dismissed by the authorities. They don't know housewives, no. So they became experts. They learned about it, they recruited experts, and they became experts themselves. And they led a national movement to do something about hazardous waste that had been there before something was built. Okay? And that led to, I think that led to the Superfund law, where if a former waste site is found covered up with dirt and all that, you track down every company that did business there, and they're supposed to pay for some of it. You have a share of it. You can't, it's hard to track anybody who did it, but you know who owned it and used it. So the government puts in a lot of money, and I think it can be paid by former owners. Okay, but the people of Niagara Falls, especially the women in the neighborhood, drove this movement. Here they are moving out. They had to leave. I think they got some compensation to get out, but they left the place. You see them packing up and loading their cars if they moved out. And they were very clear about the corporate responsibility, that there's certain companies over here doing things, and they need to be held accountable for it. One of the things with these issues is that you don't have a smoking gun. You don't have one person who did something and you track it down. You often have to do it statistically. There's a complicated relationship between chemicals and health. It takes a lot of skills and knowledge to be able to make a credible analysis of what the problem is. So this is one of the rare issues where academics played a key part in making this popular movement happen. And it's a handful of people that started to look at these issues early on and did the early studies and raised the issues, working with the community groups who are trying to do some community groups that can help us. You know, we don't know how to do this analysis. So Robert Bullard, so a guy I think Texas and then Louisiana, he's moved around. So other people, so we worked on it. Bullard and Bryant and concerned citizens are African American. Lee's Chinese American. Charles Lee is the guy who actually did that study that showed that first big study. One important one here was concerned citizens of South Central Los Angeles. Los Angeles had a waste problem. Okay? Which generated, the city of Los Angeles generated a lot of waste. And it's a huge territory, so LA's got mountain ranges in it. You know, so pick up the trash, fill up a canyon, cover it over, and fill up the next canyon. So one thing that was happening was that residents in the city of Los Angeles who live near the sites or proposed sites or on the routes of the trucks were objecting to all these trucks of trash coming in, the waste coming in and filling up the canyon next to them. So they were opposing, they were pushing back on